Welcome back to the late reader. The lamp is lit. The window is open. The rain has not stopped. Settle in. Listen.
Ashtray, a modern retelling. Channel, The Late Reader. Style, cinematic, atmospheric fiction narration. Welcome back, night owls, to The Late Reader. Dim your screens, check your locks, and get comfortable. Tonight, we're dusting off a masterpiece from the grandfather of the modern ghost story, M.R. James. We are reimagining his classic tale, The Ash Tree, bringing a very old, very patient evil out of the 17th century and into the present day. Remember, the stories we tell here are pure fiction, but that doesn't mean they won't follow you into your dreams.
Let's begin. There's a specific kind of arrogance that comes with inheriting old money. Richard Fell had it in spades. When Richard inherited Castringham Hall, a sprawling, overgrown estate deep in the Suffolk countryside, he didn't see centuries of family history. He saw a boutique luxury hotel. He saw a multi-million-dollar flip. The house was a hulking mass of crumbling stone and ivy, surrounded by 100 acres of dense, silent woods. But the most striking feature of Castringham wasn't the architecture. It was a tree.
On the west side of the manor stood a massive, gnarled ash tree. Its trunk was as wide as a minivan, hollowed out by time and rot, and its sprawling, heavy branches reached out like gray fingers, practically pressing against the antique glass of the second-story windows. Richard's architects begged him to cut it down. It was terrible for the foundation, they said, but Richard refused. He thought it gave the property a trendy, dark academia aesthetic. He really should have listened to the architects.
To understand what happened to Richard, you have to go back to the year 1690, to the first man to own the manor, Sir Matthew Fell. During the height of the local witch trials, Sir Matthew had testified against a village woman named Mrs. Mothersole. He claimed that he had seen her climbing the branches of that very ash tree outside his window in the dead of night, muttering to herself and cutting twigs with a curved blade.
Based largely on his testimony, Mrs. Mothersole was hanged. But as they dragged her to the gallows, she didn't weep or beg. She just stared at Sir Matthew with eyes full of a venomous rage and whispered a single cryptic phrase: "There will be guests at the hall." A few weeks later, Sir Matthew was found dead in his bed in the west bedroom. His body was blackened, swollen, and twisted in an unnatural posture of sheer agony. The coroner suspected Italian poison, but found no wounds on the body.
The room was sealed shut. For over 300 years, the west bedroom remained locked, gathering dust, a tomb of family trauma. Until Richard arrived. Richard, being a man of the 21st century, didn't believe in curses. He ripped the boards off the west bedroom on his third day at Castringham. It was mid-November, and a bitter, freezing gale had knocked out the power and the smart thermostats in the renovated wing of the house. The west bedroom, directly above the old kitchens and boasting a massive stone fireplace, was the only room in the house that could hold any heat.
The housekeeper, a local woman who knew the village lore, practically begged him not to sleep there. "The air hasn't changed since your ancestor died in that bed," she warned. Richard just laughed her off, lit a fire in the hearth, and set up his laptop on the antique mattress. That night, the wind died down. The estate was dead quiet. But Richard couldn't sleep. Something was scraping against the window pane. Richard tried to ignore it. He told himself it was just the branches of the ancient ash tree outside, brushing the glass. But the air was completely still. There,
he sat up, grabbing his smartphone and turning on the flashlight. He pointed the beam at the window. For a split second, he thought he saw something retreating down the trunk of the tree. Something fast. Something that moved with far too many legs to be a squirrel. Richard shivered, blaming his exhaustion, and pulled the heavy comforter up to his chin. He turned off the flashlight. At 3 a.m., Richard woke up. The fire had died to a faint, glowing ember. The room was suffocatingly hot, smelling of dry earth, copper, and rotting leaves.
Richard couldn't move. He lay paralyzed by the kind of primal terror that short-circuits the human brain. At the foot of his bed, silhouetted against the moonlight filtering through the window, were heads. Round, grayish-brown shapes, roughly the size of a human skull, bobbing slowly up and down at the edge of his mattress. They were perfectly silent. Suddenly, one of the shapes detached itself from the mattress. It hit the floorboards with a soft, heavy plump like a large sack of wet meat dropping onto the wood.
Then another dropped. Plump. And another. Plump. Richard tried to scream, but the air caught in his throat as the last shape at the foot of his bed didn't drop to the floor. Instead, it crawled rapidly up the blanket, toward his chest. The contractors found Richard Fell the next morning. Just like his ancestor, centuries before, his body was entirely blackened, swollen, and contorted in a silent scream.
The local police arrived, completely baffled. They were standing outside beneath the window, inspecting the property, when one of the K9 units, a German shepherd, broke free from its handler. The dog ran straight toward the massive ash tree, barking furiously at the hollowed-out gap in its trunk. Before anyone could stop it, the dog lunged toward the dark hole. The edge of the rotted wood gave way. The dog slipped inside. There was a moment of silence. And then, a yelp.
It wasn't just a bark. It was a horrific, blood-curdling shriek of pain that echoed across the estate, followed by the muffled sound of a frantic, wet struggle inside the trunk of the tree. Then, silence. The police backed away, drawing their flashlights and weapons. The animal control officer refused to reach inside. Instead, they brought over a heavy-duty smoke machine used for pest control, shoved the nozzle into the hollow root, and pumped the inside of the tree full of dense, toxic smoke. They waited.
At first, nothing happened. But as the smoke billowed out of the upper branches, something appeared in the fork of the tree. It was a round, bulbous mass. It looked like a hairless, veined human head. It twitched, collapsed inward, and tumbled out of the tree, hitting the grass with a heavy thud. The officers stepped closer, shining their lights on it. It was a spider, an impossibly massive, bloated arachnid, its body seared by the chemical smoke, its thick legs twitching in the damp grass. And it wasn't alone.
Dozens of them began to pour out of the hollow trunk. Great, gray-haired monstrosities, driven out by the fumes, dropping from the branches like overripe fruit. The police panicked. They poured gasoline on the base of the trunk and set the ancient ash tree ablaze. It burned for 2 days. When the fire finally died down and the smoking husk of the tree cracked open and fell apart, they found what had been feeding the roots for 300 years.
Deep inside a rounded hollow in the earth, beneath the ash tree, lay a skeleton. The skin was dried tight against the bones like dark parchment, and strands of thin black hair still clung to the skull. The forensic team quietly packed it away, but anyone who knew the history of Castringham Hall knew exactly who they had found. Mrs. Mothersole had never really left the manor. She had just laid down her roots and waited for the guests to arrive.
Thank you for joining us tonight on The Late Reader. If you enjoyed this modern trip into M.R. James's nightmares, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which classic horror tale we should resurrect next. Check your windows tonight, and as always, stay up late with us next time.
That was the story. The lamp will still be on when you wake. New stories every Friday at the late hour. Until then, watch your reflection.